My name is Patrick Sears. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Surrey. My job entails both research and teaching, and most of the time I spend researching mass spectrometry. So I'm really interested in how we can use mass spectrometry to be able to detect threat materials, but to us, to the environment, to green technologies, and how we can then use mass spectrometry to solve those challenges and make analyses which are helpful for us in everyday life. So direct analysis mass spectrometry, systems where you're bypassing chromatographic separation, allows you to introduce materials to your mass spectrometer much faster and easier than traditionally would be done. An example would be the radium mass spectrometer, where using the atmospheric solids analysis probe brings the material straight into the mass spectrometer. At Surrey, we're working very much to try and develop new areas of ambient ionisation and direct analysis mass spectrometry, because that will again allow us those faster analyses. It will allow us analyses which are less complicated. It will allow analyses which are easier for people to understand and easier for people to see the results of. So we're trying to drive this technology using Waters platforms because we get the support from Waters which enables us to do that. Really interested in how we can use mass spectrometry to help solve everyday problems. How can we look at a situation within the world and then use mass spectrometry to find an answer to it? I'm trying to understand how we can use ambient ionisation mass spectrometry to protect our borders. How can we stop materials being brought into the country that represent a threat to us, whether those are explosives or even novel drugs? How can we then protect ourselves by understanding what those materials are? Can we then be able to understand how much of that material is there and be able to then, with really good confidence, interdict that and give us forensic information that we could use to prosecute somebody if necessary, but certainly to make sure that we are safe in our everyday business. I've had a really long-term collaboration with Waters. I've been working with them for over 10 years now. And no matter who the people are, it's always been a really positive experience for us. We've found that we've had great support, both in terms of the instruments and in the teaching. So I've been taught how to use these instruments myself by a number of different members of Waters, and it's been really useful for me. I've then been able to pass that on to my students.